It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you an international motivational speaker that's basic motto in life is anything is possible. And I would like for you to welcome and to honor our guest speaker by giving her a warm welcome. This is Miss Becky Curran. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. How's everyone doing today? I always start off by asking this question. How many of you have interacted in person with a little person before? See, numbers are pretty small, and that is okay and understandable because there are only 30,000 little people living in the United States. So you take a large public university, you could put us all there, and then you wouldn't see another little person anywhere around the country outside of that college campus where you put us all together. That's unlikely to happen, but I always say that because a lot of times when I'm in public, most people have never seen a little person before seeing me. And where they get their information is in entertainment and news media. If they see a little person on TV, sometimes that's the first time they see a little person, and they may have never interacted with one before. I always encourage people to treat people the way you want to be treated. And especially the passion of what I do comes from knowing that there are new parents out there who are average height. 80% of little people are born to average height parents. So sometimes when they're in the delivery room, they find out that their child's a little person, and they may have never interacted with a little person before. And that's exactly the situation that I came into in my life. My parents are both average height. They had never fully interacted with a little person before. Maybe they saw little people in the circus, or they saw them in some comedic movies. Maybe they heard lots of horror stories about what could happen to little people in different situations. But they didn't understand at that point in time when I was born that I was going to be able to lead an independent and fulfilling life. And they wanted to be reminded that it was going to be possible, and they were willing to do whatever they could to make sure it was possible. When I was first born, right in the delivery room, my parents were told that I was a little person. Then they did as much research as possible. They were referred to a geneticist who they went to a few days later after I was born, and they were walking down the hallway, and they saw a sign that said birth defects. They made sure that the receptionist knew that that was a very offensive thing to tell someone who just had a child. Yes, people have different genetic conditions. Yes, different things happen when people are born. But to tell new parents that they have a child with birth defects, that's not what you're wanting to see. So fortunately, they did end up changing that sign to say genetics. And that's just a sign of how dedicated my parents have been to make sure that I am able to live the best life possible. Growing up, I only hung out with my average height peers. So I was in a high school like people like all of you. I was okay with being the only one who was different. I just wanted to be treated just like everyone else. Unfortunately, with my condition of achondroplastic dwarfism and the 200 types of dwarfism, there are some medical complications that come with it. When I was 3 years old, I had bowed legs. Well, leading up to then, I had bowed legs, and they wanted to take bone out of my legs to straighten them out. So I had surgery when I was 3 years old, and then tonsils and adenoids and tubes in and out of my ears happened throughout the next few years. And then when I was 13, in 7th grade, when I was in middle school, I had to have leg surgery again, where they took bone out of my pelvis area, this area, and put it back in my legs because I was almost finished growing at about 4 feet. Luckily, that just kept making me stronger. I was participating in sports during this time. From early on, I was involved in soccer, sailing, skiing, and swimming. It was my goal after my leg surgery to be able to get back on the field for the last game of the season, and I was able to. It was the fall season. And I was still playing sports among my average height peers. Didn't feel like I needed to do anything differently. Then when I was 15, I was told I had been falling a lot, and I was told that I needed to have back surgery because with my condition we have spinal stenosis. So when I'm sitting down, I'm the same height as most of you, but a lot of my organs and bones are more compact and closer together. So my spinal cord was being compressed by my spinal column. So to relieve that pressure, I had 7 pieces of my lower vertebrae taken out. And I had to miss 29 days of school. And this was in 10th grade, and it was really hard for me because being in honors classes was really important for me. I wanted to be able to keep up with my class and get into the best colleges possible and just stay on track. And there were so many different setbacks that kept happening, especially when it came to medical complications. I still couldn't let it get to me. I had to keep going, I had to keep trying. So I had the option, after I missed 29 days of school, to stay back a grade. But when I was first born, and when we found a specialist at 6 months who specialized in medical care for little people, he recommended that my parents keep me in the same school system. I know I was going to stay in the same school system at this point in time, but even going back a grade was going to be difficult for me because I had already gotten to know all the people in my grade, and then I would have to get to know another whole group of people. So I did whatever I could to stay with my class and make sure I graduated on time with everyone else 2 years later. I did have to go from honors to college preparatory classes in 11th grade, but then I was able to get back on track. In senior year, I was in some AP and honors classes again, and I applied to 9 colleges, and I ended up going to Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island. One of the reasons why I chose to go to Providence was I was going on a tour and there was another little person who was already going to that school. I just saw her in the cafeteria and I thought, you know what, this is comforting because that means that everyone in this school environment has been exposed to another little person. So at least they know, or at least she's teaching them, that we can be treated like humans. We can do anything that anyone else does. Sometimes we may do it differently. Sometimes we may take a little bit longer, but we can still do it. We can still accomplish any goal we set our minds to. We can't have people's limitations on us based on past perceptions in the media, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, get to us or prevent us from doing what we're capable of. So I ended up going to Providence College, and I was there for 4 years, and it so happened, it's not a very diverse school, it's mostly Irish Catholic white people, but there happened to be another little person who came in a year below me. So during that time while I was there were 3 little people. And the girl who was a year below me, she and I spoke on a panel because the education majors were advised to read a book that this guy wrote about his daughter who has dwarfism. So then we spoke on a panel with this guy, and she was telling me about her college experience being so much richer than what I was experiencing, because I was still trying to fit into the larger population of Irish Catholic white people, and there were still some diversity among ethnicities, but it was a smaller group of people. And because she was African American, she found a niche and was able to fit in with that group. And I mention this because a lot of times people say, oh, that person has 2 things going wrong with them, or 2 things that are different, their life must be really hard. But sometimes when you have a group to fit into, and especially in history, when a group that's made so much more progress when it comes to equality and inclusion, the disability community, and I choose to identify with having a disability because it's a larger population than I can advocate for, and under the Americans with Disability Act, little people are included because we do need adaptations to fit in to the average height world, just stools, pedal extensions for driving, other things. But we still have so much work to do when it comes to acceptance among the disability community, where some of these other groups have made so much more progress. So to know that you can fit into another group sometimes can be more beneficial, even though we all have a long way to go. So college ended up being a great experience. Otherwise, I had some great friends, but it was a small group of friends. And what I learned early on, especially during my college years, was it's okay to have a small group of friends who are going to respect you and be kind and admire you for who you are, rather than trying to please people who may not necessarily want to understand or try to understand. I always encourage people, ask questions, don't make assumptions, because if you just ask a few questions, you'll learn. You may have so many more similarities than you thought with that person, and it's just a simple conversation. Some people ask me, what if the person that I talk to after you is not as approachable as you are? You don't know until you ask. Everyone's allowed to have a bad day, so it could be maybe that person seems standoffish, but they're just not having a great day. I did have a little bit of trouble transitioning right before college. I decided not to tell, and I did mention it in my college application essay. I mentioned about my surgery, so I was pretty obvious about being a little person. But when I was assigned roommates, I did not feel the need to tell my two roommates who I was assigned to that I was a little person, because I've always just thought of myself as a human, and I can adapt to any environment. But I learned soon enough that not everyone can adapt as easily as I can, and there was some fear. I got to know one of my roommates, and we got along really well over the phone, and then once she met me, she was shocked. And that happens a lot. And it takes people understanding that it's okay to have that reaction, but be willing to learn, be willing to change your perception, be willing to understand, because you have to start somewhere. Her base was no previous exposure around a little person. So that's what she was coming in with. And later on, we did come to a more common understanding, but I had to go through some tough times where I dealt with a lot of mean-heartedness without it being intentional, but not understanding why it was happening, because, as I said, I've always just thought of myself as a human, just wanting to get through life, and of course, making allies along the way, but there are people who are going to be bothered and continue to be bothered. Sometimes it takes people having to have that exposure. Like disability is the one community that anyone can fall into at any point in their lives. So it's better to be prepared ahead of time, but some people don't really change their perspective or understanding until it directly affects them. But what I try to encourage is for everyone to be understanding and accepting without that having to affect them. But be okay if it is affecting you. A lot of times people are afraid to talk about maybe some internal disabilities that they're facing. For me, I've never been able to hide my difference. So I've been able to embrace it, and I want other people to be able to embrace it, because it's a lot to hold up, to have to hide whatever's going on in your life from the rest of the world. There may be someone right next to you who's going through that same experience, and you don't know until you share your stories and talk about it. So one of the reasons I always start off with our perceptions in the media is my goal in life has been to change what people see when they're consuming entertainment and news media, because it directly affects how I'm treated. If someone sees a negative perception of a little person on TV, they will treat me in a different way than someone who may see a positive perception. There are all different cable channels and networks who are airing different shows related to little people and movies, and there's so much content out there. But even after consuming whatever content it may be, I think it's important for people to just treat a person like a person, because not everyone's related to whatever behavior may be seen on TV. So after school, I ended up, during college, I had some internships in entertainment-related spaces. I worked at a news station in Providence in entertainment promotions and publicity. I was a marketing major in college, so this was a little bit related to that. And then for my junior year, the summer after my junior year going into senior year, I wanted an internship that would potentially lead to a job after college. So I looked at the newspaper that we had, I think it was maybe the Boston Globe, and there was a list of 100 ad agencies in Boston. So I sent my resume to all 100 ad agencies. And the one that responded was Allied Advertising, and they're actually the intermediary between the movie companies and the general public. So I would go out to movie screenings and I would write notes on what people reacted to, and then I'd be able to send those notes to the studios. And it was pretty cool because I was just thinking traditional advertising, making print ads or commercials, but I was willing to do anything, and it just so happened that this internship was related to entertainment because that was the field that I wanted to get into eventually. So coming out of that, I then did the news station, and then I was actually asked to be a stand-in. This means like when they set up the lights on set for the actor who would be around my height, for Peter Dinklage on the movie Underdog that was filming in Providence. And unfortunately, it conflicted with my last 2 weeks of school, so I wasn't able to take that opportunity. But I asked, since I already had the connections, why don't I help out with the casting? So I was able to spend the summer helping out with the extras casting process. Sometimes people would cancel life-threatening doctor's appointments just to come to set, because everyone, especially in cities that don't film as often as others, it was an exciting time for people. So I learned a lot about how casting works, and then I had the opportunity to move out to California and work for a talent manager. One of the reasons that I was encouraged to move out to California also had to do with, after my freshman year in college, I did make the decision, because there was a Little People convention happening in Danvers, Massachusetts. I decided that that was going to be my first time really interacting with the Little People community. Leading up to that, I had always just been with my average-height friends in social environments, but it did become a little bit more difficult when people started dating and I was being left out. I did have some friends that, even in high school, felt uncomfortable having me around because they thought that it would prevent them from meeting guys. It was heart-wrenching, but I learned that maybe I did need to find some people like me, more people who had similar experiences, so I knew that I wasn't alone. I know I had mentioned that there were other little people in my college, but we weren't necessarily in the same social environments. After the convention in Boston, I still was a little unsure. So what happens during the convention, it's the week of 4th of July, and it's workshops, different medical doctors are there, so you can consult with them if you don't have a specialist in your geographic area. You can have dances every night. There's a fashion show, a talent show. So it's just a way to help us feel normal and be in an environment where no one is going to look and point and stare and judge us. We can all just be together. And it's a great resource for new parents, so they can see adult little people and understand that they can lead independent and fulfilling lives. And the best thing that the parents can do is let their child be independent, let their child go out there, and if they fall, it's okay, because that's how they're going to learn. So a lot of my network that I met over the years while I was in college, people happen to live in Southern California. It just so happens that they're smart and like nice weather. So I had that opportunity. I had a place to stay. I was going to work for a talent manager. She also happened to be a little person. Unfortunately, the moment I got out to California, that fell through, and I have yet to meet this lady. But what I learned from that is we're all human, we all make mistakes, and even people with similar life situations may be different. Just because we're little doesn't mean we're all the same. So I networked with the Providence Alumni Network, who was living out there. There are people, luckily, all over the world that I can connect with who went to Providence College and have that connection. And I just started sending out resumes. It got to the point where I sent out about 1,000 resumes, and of those 1,000 resumes, I was asked to go in for 100 interviews. Most of the interviews, I was judged the moment I walked in the door. I knew I wasn't getting the job, but I still was going to give it my all. And it was practice, and I just kept going. And I learned that if these people don't want me in their environment, I don't want to be in their environment. It's not fair for me to have to be in an uncomfortable situation because they're uncomfortable because of the way I look and because of my difference. It was clear that my resume stated exactly what I've done up until that point, and they wouldn't have called me in for an interview if I wasn't qualified for the job. But I couldn't let it discourage me. I had to keep going, and it took about 6 months, and even my parents asked, "Are you ready to come home yet?" I wasn't ready to come home across the country. I had worked so hard to get myself out there. I was willing to do whatever it took to stay. So one thing I found that was very beneficial was a network of temporary to permanent placement agencies. So you go to interview at these agencies, and then they can pitch you to different jobs. And you can start as a temporary employee and then maybe eventually become a full-time staff at that location outside of the temp agency. So fortunately, that method worked a little bit better. It took some time. I worked for a month at the Hallmark Channel. Someone was on paternity leave, so I was just helping out around the holidays with gifting and different marketing needs that they had. And then I started temping at one of the largest talent agencies called Creative Artists Agency, and they represent some very high-profile people and athletes. I was asked to work in Hispanic marketing. I was willing to do whatever it took to get in there, but unfortunately I took French in high school instead of Spanish. So it did prove to be a little bit difficult, but I still found a way to make it work. And once there was an opening in entertainment marketing, I was able to switch over to there. And during this time, I was still a temporary employee, so it was proceeding with care, making sure I was making the right decisions and that people were there for me, even though I wasn't a permanent employee yet. And in entertainment marketing, it was more than product placement. So what we would do is, like, Harley Davidson was one of our clients. So we would read a lot of the magazines that have pictures of celebrities, and then if we saw a celebrity wearing or using a Harley Davidson or wearing Harley Davidson gear, we would offer to send them stuff, just because the goal would be for them to then be seen in more magazines and help with product placement. So even if they weren't wearing Harley Davidson or riding a Harley Davidson, by sending them one, we would hope that maybe they would use one. Unfortunately, we sent one to Shia LaBeouf, and he gave it to his mom, so that was pretty poor publicity, but that does happen. And then Moet Champagne was another client, so I would read movie scripts and figure out where we could place the champagne. It wouldn't just be a scene where there's champagne, it would be, let's have a moment that's called the Moet moment, and we're doing a cheers. So it was really like product integration. And we had eBay as a client, so we had some comedians go up and down the state of California finding people who are winners in different activities like yo-yo and flip cup and different activities that people can win at. So just random things that would make corporate clients feel more excited about being connected to the entertainment world, like Coca-Cola being a sponsor of different award shows. And then once I was doing that for about 2 years. It took 7 months for me to be hired on as a full-time employee, and then I felt a little bit safer, but then there were a lot of different transitions going on in the marketing department, so I was asked to move over to the comedy touring department, where I was able to go out and see comedians all around Los Angeles. Sometimes I would go up to 3 nights, up to 3 shows a night, and I would send my notes to the agents. And it reminded me a little bit about when I was in advertising and sending the notes to the studio. So I would really figure out what people reacted to, what people liked and didn't like. And around that time, I ended up putting together a panel. I built a network of people with disabilities who happen to work in the entertainment industry, both in front of and behind the camera. And I put together a panel at the talent agency, and we had about 160 people show up. And we really wanted to just prove that there's talent out there. People assume that within the disability community, they're not talented. There are so many people in front of the camera and behind the camera who just need to be seen, need to be given the opportunities. And that's really where a lot of my passions started coming together. I was able to have this panel discussion at a high-profile, influential agency, and then continue the conversation and show people why this is important. There was a little person on the panel to encourage, we need better representation because it really affects how we're treated in society. People need opportunities because the more people see, the more normal they start to feel. And who knows what normal really is, but until people find a level of comfort where they can interact with people who look different, we need to say people just want to feel normal. So after that, I ended up working in casting and tried to help with the casting decisions that took place in the studio environment. And there were some times where I was encouraging people to just hire someone with a disability for something that wasn't necessarily written out. Because people can do a lot of things that are in scripts. People who are the writers of casting just need to think outside the box, be more inclusive, make what's on TV and in movies look like the world around us. And as I was saying, you're not going to see a little person every day. So I'm not saying you need to overpopulate because we want to get to a level playing field, but you can just make more people feel included and considered for the job in any environment. So after I did casting for a while, I realized that I wanted to come back to Boston and start the speaking. Start getting closer to people like you guys. Start showing people the truths of who I am and not letting the media dictate people's perceptions. I was able to start speaking at my sister's school. She's a creative writing teacher, and I got to know a lot of her students and then went to different Rotary clubs and then was asked to travel to Kenya. There was a Little People organization that was forming there, and they wanted me to come and give them hope, get them to understand it's okay to be different. And I want everyone else to understand that it's okay to be different. We just need to accept people for who they are. But if people make mistakes, they make mistakes. If someone's mean to you, you deserve to tell them that they're being mean to you. Like, people are human. People are going to make mistakes, but we all have to understand that it's okay to be different. Most times, well, the way I'm feeling is that I don't feel bad for myself, but when people feel bad for me, I start to feel bad for them that they feel bad for me. So don't feel bad for people, but try to come to a common understanding that we're different, but we're alike in more ways than we think. So after doing speaking for about 1.5 years, and I'm continuing to do speaking, it's been about 4 years now that I've been speaking, I ended up moving 2 years ago to New York City, and I work now at the Performers Union, where I'm in diversity, really finding the similarities among all areas of diversity and figuring out my common goal of changing perceptions so things are more authentic and we see what we see on TV in the world we live in. And we want to see more authentic human perceptions of all kinds of people. And I just have started to speak on panels about that concept and also continue to educate people. I feel that every time I'm in front of someone, no matter where I am, just ask me questions. Ask me what's on your mind, because then you can go and educate someone else. A lot of you in this room, when you have a child someday, they could have a difference. And I don't want people to be afraid. You find ways to adapt. Now with technology, you find all the resources possible. We want people to embrace differences and understand that it's okay. Just be kind to one another. And understand that with my journey, a lot of you hopefully won't have to go on 100 interviews to get that first job. But even if you did, you can't give up. You need to follow your passion. Find what you're passionate about and keep going after those goals you have. I had one student come up to me after one of my speeches, and she said, "I've always wanted to be a teacher, but my dad told me that the market's really tough right now." She was in 6th grade. You can't have your parents limit your goals, because she was going to be so passionate about following that path. And if she didn't follow that path, she would be regretting it for a very long time. So your path may change. I know when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor, but then I realized how much schooling it took, and then I ended up taking a different path. It's okay for your path to change, but you should know when you want it to change, how you're going to adapt. You can't always just leave a job because you hate it, I know, because of stability and all of that, but find ways to do things that you're passionate about outside of the working environment, and that will eventually become your environment. And that's what happened to me, even though it was really hard for me to leave California because it took me so long to get my foot in the door there. I found what my passion was. I wanted to connect and be with people like all of you. I really believe that anything's possible. And I want to take this opportunity to allow you guys to ask me any questions you have on your mind, because no question to me is offensive. I feel that if you guys ask questions, I can educate you about any aspect of my life or anything in general. Any questions? He said, have there been any positive effects of being a little person? Absolutely. I think, especially when I was working in the talent agency, I ended up meeting some high-profile people like Colin Farrell and Tom Hanks, and a lot of people who you are usually so afraid to talk to because you're like, oh, they're too famous, they don't want to talk to me. But they were able to connect with me. And even one of the partners at the talent agency who represented people like George Clooney and Robert Redford, he was able to open up to me and tell me that he had a father who lived with him for 8 years who had no legs. And no one else in that agency knew that story, because a lot of times people are afraid to share those types of stories because they don't want people to think of them any differently. But people are open to sharing those types of stories with me, and that's what makes me feel alive, because it gets people to open up, and then it puts them at ease. That there are so many beautiful stories out there, and I think I would miss out on hearing a lot of them if I was just going about my everyday life being average height. Anyone else? What? Can a little person get married? Yes. There's nothing preventing us from getting married. That's a legitimate question, because I think what that can stem from is that question sometimes is the start of, can we have kids? And that's possible as well. We can have families, and there are different probabilities that happen. There's a possibility that I could be with an average height person. And if I was with that average height person, I would most likely have a 50% chance of the child having dwarfism, my type of dwarfism, which is achondroplasia, and a 50% chance of the child being average height. And then if I was with another little person with my same type of dwarfism, it would be 50% chance they would have our type of dwarfism, and 25% chance they could be average height even though neither of us are, and 25% chance where the baby would be double dominant, meaning that the baby would not live most likely past day or at most a week because they just don't have the lung capacity to live longer than that. So there are risks involved, but I've met with doctors before and they've told me that even with the pregnancy process it wouldn't be any different. Obviously we just have to watch out for pressure on the back, but we're able to get married, have a family, live a life like anyone else.
Do you think the United States, like here, is more accepting of little people than the international?
He asked if I think the United States is more accepting than other countries. Yes, absolutely. There have been horror stories I've heard of where, like in France, dwarf also means animal, so people think that it's acceptable to treat them like animals. And my friend went to a convention in Spain with other little people, and it wasn't like a celebration where you had dances and events. They had these meetings that all they talked about was eliminating the dwarf gene, which scientists have been trying to do for years, and they're also talking about limb lengthening. And that's something that I've been asked about many times in my life because I do have enough skin to be average height. So, well, average height meaning a foot taller. Like they could break my bones and put rods in and extend me to be a foot longer. That's something that I've always been opposed to because I've never wanted to change who I am or how I was made. But there are people who do that, and they think that that's kind of a quick fix to exiting the little people community. So in Spain, they ended up talking about that. There are some organizations similar to the States in Canada and in Australia and in other countries. A lot of them get really into the athletic world. They have the Dwarf Athletic Association and the World Dwarf Games every 4 years, kind of like the Paralympics, but separate because you're competing with other little people. So a lot of times that's their focus. So they may become more competitive, and that's what they have to do to fit into their country, and that's how they feel accepted. And in Kenya, when I was there, a lot of times people can't even go to school because the desks aren't set up properly. A lot of parents are hiding their kids because they don't want to bring out their child who's different. In China, there's a huge problem. A lot of children are put up for adoption, but if you get to that certain age, maybe, I think it may be 14, and you're not adoptable, they'll put you out on the streets. One of my college roommates was actually on a business trip, and she saw little people all among the sides of the streets because they were not welcomed at their orphanages anymore. And a lot of times the orphanages won't even start the paperwork until people here find these children and know that they are living in those orphanages because they don't think they're adoptable. So I definitely think here in the States, even though we have a long way to go, we're definitely advanced when it comes to acceptance, and especially starting to put content out there, good or bad. People at least know we exist, know we're a part of society, and we're not planning to go anywhere. So thank you. Well, where? All right. We'll go back there and then come back down. What did you say?
If you had the choice, this would be average height. If you had the choice not to be little, what would you take?
So if I had the choice not to be little and be average height, I would not take it, but during that decision-making time, I would request that the rest of the world be more accepting of my difference and as accepting as I am of my difference, because that would make it a lot easier. Way back. Do you mind repeating it? Do I drive a smart car? That's a good question. Because it's understandable because it's a smaller car, it would be easier to navigate. Because I live in New York City, the past 2 years I actually haven't had a car. I've just been getting around on the subway or walking around the city. But before that, when I was in California, I had a Ford Taurus. So I've had some luck just with the sizes of the Ford vehicles. And what I have are pedal extensions. So I'm sitting on the seat like everyone else in the driver's seat, and then my legs are hanging, obviously, because I'm not being able to reach the floor. So there are pedal extensions that go from the actual pedals of the car to where my feet are. And I can get them customized to make sure they're the right height. And I just make sure they're secured on tightly. And then because my arms are shorter, I do have to be closer to the wheel. It is recommended for me to turn off the airbag feature because it could come, because I'm sitting closer to the wheel, in an accident, it could come and hit me in the wrong place. So we do get that deactivated, and then I'm able to drive like anyone else. But it does take accommodations, adaptations. It's not easy to just fly somewhere and rent a car, but it's possible. You can bring a pair of travel extensions, but sometimes those cars, the pedals just may not match up with the extensions. And that's why I'm really thankful for all the shared car services these days that do help me get around even in other cities. But hopefully I'll get back on the road again, and that'll be how it's done. It does bother me how little people are presented through networks. That's what she was asking, and social media and just the media in general. There are a lot of negative perceptions out there, and especially coming out of the movie Wolf of Wall Street, there was a dwarf tossing scene, and people have found that that's somewhat acceptable. So now bars around the country will have people pay $10 to come in and watch little people get tossed across the room. And of course that can lead to brain injuries and other complications, and the bar's excuse is, oh, it's a job for them. But it's inhumane. And I think through social media, people have talked about it so much that it's acceptable. And because there are so many voices on social media that overpower our population of 30,000, it's hard to keep up with that. So I want other people to be encouraged to advocate on our behalf. And also, of course, people throw around the word midget, and that's extremely offensive to our community. It is like using other terms for other populations, and it's really offensive. And people need to look at us as people first, and then they can say that being a little person is a part of who we are, but we don't need that label. We just want to be called by our names. And
what would you say to those people that take the jobs at the bars and like the actors in the Wolf of Wall Street?
He asked what I would say to the people who take the jobs at the bars, dwarf tossing, and Wolf of Wall Street actors. We've actually talked, or some people I've heard who have talked to the person who was in Wolf of Wall Street, and he was like, someone was going to take the job. And that's kind of the mentality. They just think, if I didn't take it, someone else was going to take it. So I think a lot of it stems from their values and their families and how they were raised. And if their families were constantly treating them as they were being raised as props, they're going to think that that's their only value and their only worth. And what I would want to say to them is, it doesn't matter how you were treated in the past. Like, this affects a community of people and how we're portrayed around the world. And if you don't just, like, at the end of the day, do you feel rewarded after that experience? Like, you should understand that they're not treating you with respect and the amount of respect that you deserve. So even those people who've made those mistakes in the past, I would be willing to work with them and get them to get back on track. But I definitely think of it as someone taking the wrong path and also injuring and hurting themselves. And it's not going to be a great result in the long run. And hopefully, they'll start to learn. But it's hard, and that's why I tell people, don't treat me based on how you've seen people portrayed before, because I shouldn't have to be, just because that person has a similar condition as to myself, I shouldn't have to be punished for their misbehavior or like even be rewarded for something good they do because it wasn't the work that I did. So I think it's just getting people to understand that they're not being treated properly and they should move beyond that behavior. One more. Let's see. Maybe way back since they're he asked how tall I am. I'm 4 feet and 3/4 of an inch, but I rounded up to 4'1". Is one more? All right. He asked what my relationship with large dogs is and if I'd ever adopt one. Growing up, the closest thing to a pet I had was a fish. And in my adult years, I've had experiences with smaller dogs. I do worry about the larger dogs. Just in our neighborhood growing up, we had larger dogs. I think if they're calm-tempered, it's not as hard, but I think it'll be a very difficult process trying to keep up with a large dog, and I don't think I'd do it.
Guys, why don't you join me in thanking Becky for coming?
Thank you all.